Mr. Polymeropoulos, greetings and nice to see you on First Western.
Good to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
I would like to start with your last visit to Moscow in 2017 as a CIA official. Why did you visit Russia and what did happen with you?
Well, that was not something that is a high point of my career, that's for sure. So I was the deputy operations chief for what we call Europe and Eurasia in CIA, and so I had a vast responsibility for running clandestine operations across the European continent, and of course across Russia as well. But at the same time, that also entails what we call liaison with many different countries, including the Russians. And so I traveled to Moscow as part of what is a routine, unproductive but routine visit in which we engage with Russian security officials. This is something that, even during the darkest days of the Cold War, the CIA and the KGB would occasionally meet. It's always good to have those channels of communication open. And so I went in December of 2017 for a routine visit to meet with, of course, the U.S. Embassy, but also my Russian security counterparts. In the middle of the night on one, it was a 10-day trip. In the middle of the night, early in the visit, I woke up to, terrible migraine headaches, vertigo, ringing in my ears, physically sick. And something, clearly had happened to me. And it started a really terrible health journey in which ultimately I had to retire. And this, of course, myself and I think many others believe was, what's called Havana syndrome. It was some kind of attack that was perpetrated against me, against many other officials, U.S. officials around the world. But unfortunately, it caused me to eventually retire in 2019.
Did Russia use a sort of secret weapons against you and other CIA officials?
I think, that is one of the leading theories. Russia had has developed directed energy weapons, and throughout its history, the Soviet Union did, and certainly Russia continued on with, the research and development of such devices. And so I think one of the leading theories in this is that Russia is, the perpetrator of this. I think, the investigation is ongoing. There's lots of controversy within the intelligence community in the United States on what happened, but ultimately, I think we'll get to the bottom of this. It just may take some more time.
Thank you for sharing your personal information about this. And I would like to move to our major topic, the US leaked documents. Why did this happen? And why did an ordinary National Guards man has an access to top secret information?
So that's a great question. I think you have to break it down in a couple of different areas. First of all, the national security infrastructure in any country, but in the United States is made up of humans, and sometimes humans, there are people who do things that they should not. You do everything possible to mitigate that, but clearly this is someone who is a traitor to the United States and who leaked this information, presumably in these chat rooms, to almost show off to his friends. I think he's going to go to jail for a long time, and it's caused the United States a bit of embarrassment. But when it comes down to it, you have young people, particularly in the U.S. military, who do have access to information. Now, this intelligence unit in which this individual was serving in, did have responsibility to produce analysis and briefing slides for senior members of the U.S. military. This individual was someone in kind of the information technology realm who was supposed to maintain these systems, and so conceivably they would have access to this. I think what's going to happen at the end of the day is people are going to take a look at the background investigation that was done. Was this individual suitable? That is a very good question. And then, of course, I think there's going to be an effort to more tightly restrict classified information. One of the things that I would like to point out, of course, is after September 11th, 2001, the U.S. intelligence community was criticized for not sharing enough information amongst the different, parts of the U.S. government. And so we opened up the aperture some more. And of course, there's a danger in that, is that more people do have access to such information. I think ultimately this is not a terrible, this is not a disaster in terms of what occurred several years ago with the leaks of Snowden, in which major systems were compromised. This is damaging. I think there's going to be, potentially some loss of signals intelligence streams. This individual is a traitor, but and should go to jail for a long time. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's as severe. And of course, in terms of the bilateral relationships, we have the largest land war in Europe since 2002. We have a situation in which our ally in Ukraine, must prevail, and so I don't think this is going to stop any intelligence sharing. And so while it's a bit embarrassing for the United States, I don't think it's going to affect the war effort whatsoever.
Also, our military leader, General Kirill Budanov, head of our military intelligence, said that that it's a part of informational campaign. The U.S. secret documents leaked, aimed to share a distrust between the U.S. and Ukraine. Do you support such point?
So, I think Budanov makes a good point. This is going to be used by our adversaries to try to drive a wedge between the U.S. and Ukraine. It will not work. Again, I don't think this is going to stop the sharing of intelligence. It certainly will not stop the provision of required weapons, particularly for the coming offensive. I think there were some points in the media that said that perhaps Ukraine would even change its strategy. I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe the information in the document leaks was actually something that was not, some of it which was not already known or suspected, and of course some of it was false as well. So I think the Ukrainians have taken a very smart tact on this, which is to there are bigger things on the plate every day of the Ukrainian civilian and military and national security leadership than these documents. So I think and the last point is that this is why one of the things I always talk about is when you have a bilateral relationship that is as strong as the U.S. and Ukraine, and what's quite extraordinary is the degree of cooperation, of desire between the two sides for Ukraine to prevail. I think that ultimately, when you have issues like this, that strength in the bilateral relationship, allows us to weather these storms. There might be a difficult conversation or two between U.S. and Ukrainian officials, but I think that's it. And you just press forward. And so I think Budanov is right. And you just, there are big things at play right now, which of course is the coming offensive.
Also, Reuters reports that Russia could be behind of the U.S. intelligence secret documents leak. What is the possibility of such scenario?
Well, I think one of the things we don't know about just yet is in this chat room, and this is getting into the details. So this enlisted member of the U.S. Air Force had this chat room in which he was, showing off and sharing documents. And one of the questions is, who else was in that chat room? Was anyone with ties to adversaries such as Russia in there who then obtained the documents? Of course, what is most interesting is that eventually, as this kind of migrated through other parts of kind of the social media network, it was clear that Russians had taken some of the casualty figures and manipulated them. One of the things that I find interesting is, of course, if you follow, and I'm sure you all do, if you follow kind of the Russian Telegram channels, the military channels, I don't think they believe any of these things are real. They think it's a whole psychological operation by the United States. And so there's just a lot of confusion behind this. But I think that, at some point we're going to find out there is some Russian component of this, either taking the documents and manipulating them, or collecting them via some of these chat rooms. So, the investigation is very preliminary. We'll see in the days and weeks to come.
Also, U.S. media reports that according to U.S. secret documents, the U.S. spy on its allies like Ukraine and South Korea. Is it a sort of friendly spying? I think the best way to look at this is how
how muted, how unimpressed the reaction is from our allies. Because the fact of the matter is, countries do keep track of what one another is doing. I can't comment exactly on kind of U.S. intelligence activities against some of our friendly partners, but every country has its interests. Every country wants to know what not only their adversaries but sometimes their friends are thinking. I would imagine from the Ukrainian side they don't care much about these revelations, and at a time where you can make a point at a time where the U.S. has contributed many billions of dollars of aid, it wouldn't be that surprising if we were trying to figure out how it was being spent. And so ultimately, the notion that countries spy on each other, even sometimes friendly ones, I don't think that is a surprise to anybody in the intelligence business.
Let's cover role of Russian President Putin and his activity. The US has eliminated dozens of terrorists, and you conducted special serious operations. In your professional point of view, will it be difficult for anyone to eliminate the terrorist who is a head of government? I mean, Russian President Putin.
So, first of all, this is not something that the U.S., could or would do in the sense of, we have an executive order banning assassination. And so while we do have activities that go after designated terrorist groups, President Putin is the leader of a country. Now, I and many others certainly think that, Russian activities kind of do qualify as being, akin to a terrorist state. But that legal definition is not been made, and the fact is we do not have any abilities to target foreign leaders like that. Now, whether Ukraine would do it or not, certainly remains to be seen. I think that would be seen as quite escalatory. The one thing that I think we have to all keep in mind is it's not just, of course, Ukraine's fight for survival now. And I do believe Ukraine will prevail, but it's what to do about Russia, and in particular Vladimir Putin, when the war inevitably does end, and it will end. And so, one of my concerns is that we never forget what Russia under Vladimir Putin has done, the war crimes, the atrocities, acting like a terrorist state, in fact. And so I don't want to see Putin or Russia kind of go through this normalization process. Look, we're seeing it right now in Syria with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who is being welcomed back to the Arab League. That to me is a concern when you think about Russia, because Vladimir Putin has to be held accountable for the war crimes, and so we just have to kind of keep that in mind. I think what I would say is we have to keep documenting all the atrocities, all the terrible things that Russia has done. Because at some point when the war is over, we're going to have to hold him accountable. How that happens, I think remains to be seen. But make no mistake, Vladimir Putin is one of the great tyrants of our century.
You mentioned a designation of terrorist groups. Would you support to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism?
Yes, I very much would, and one of the things that remains a mystery to me is why the State Department is so reluctant to do so. Now, I think that the thinking behind that is that this really does trigger a lot of secondary sanctions on countries that do trade with Russia, for example. But I think it would send a very powerful message. There's a lot of support on Capitol Hill, a lot of support in Congress for doing this. There's no doubt in my mind that it's justified. I mean, the documented war crimes by the Russian military, who are under the command of Vladimir Putin. There's no doubt. So I think that Russia should be designated a state sponsor of terrorism. I think there's a lot of push in Congress to do so. I'm a bit disappointed the State Department hasn't gone down that route, but we'll see what happens. I think something that's quite extraordinary to me is and it's terrible, and there's a human tragedy in this, but every time we have this debate like this and people kind of go back and forth, Russia then inevitably will, conduct another, terrible war crime, some atrocity, whether it's, strikes on civilian infrastructure. I think we saw something the other day on social media of, Russian forces, beheading a Ukrainian soldier, which was horrific. and as terrible as that is, it's important that the world sees this. And while I hate to see this happening, this is a reflection of what Russia is doing. So, kind of going back to your original point, I would hope, that the State Department does end up designating Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism.
But according to the CIA director William Burns, Vladimir Putin still believes that he can grind down Ukraine and the West. Why does he think so? Is he so isolated that he doesn't know the status quo of the war, or he just has some mental problems?
Well, the mental acuity of Putin, remains to be seen. I think that he's not crazy. I think that he's certainly put all his chips in this. He's all in. But I think ultimately what Putin is hoping for is that the patience of the West is exhausted. I think the United States, along with Ukraine, has put together a remarkable coalition. Predominantly amongst the NATO partners, to support Ukraine. But the question is, how long can this continue? This is billions of dollars of assistance, and of course, and also in the United States. Look, we all have to kind of be very cognizant that there are some in the Republican Party, particularly in the House of Representatives, who are questioning kind of continued provision of aid. It's not the dominant theme, but I think what Putin wants to do is wait out the allies, because look, if there's no Western assistance coming, Ukraine is in trouble, and so I think that is his thinking. He can't be blind to what is happening on the battlefield, but I think his hope is that he can wait out kind of the Western assistance, and he also, of course, doesn't care about the Russian people, doesn't care about the Russian military, doesn't care about the staggering number of casualties his forces are taking. Any true leader who loved his country would never allow this. He certainly does not.
Also, US media reports that, according to secret documents, there are conflicts between Russian Ministry of Defense and Federal Security Service of Russia. Could such conflict evolve to regime change?
So, that is such a good question. I think that's something that everybody really looks at. So if you think about the stability of Vladimir Putin, this is the rise and fall of Putin, or the fall of Putin, is not going to be based on people taking to the streets. I think the Russian people are resigned to having this awful leader. You don't see a great deal of popular revolt at all. Putin derives his legitimacy from the security services, and if we see fissures, if we see kind of breaks in between the military and the several different competing factions of Russian intelligence, that is significant. One of the things that I think has been quite remarkable is the clear disdain between the Russian military and then the Wagner forces, the paramilitary groups, led by Prigozhin. And so we watch this very closely, because if there is any threat to Putin's hold on power, it would be from that security elite around him. And so, at this point, I don't think anybody assesses it's significant enough to pose a risk. But if the war, grinds on and the casualties mount, and in particular, if Ukraine is successful in the coming offensive, I think you might see more of these fissures begin or be exacerbated within the Russian security elite.
And what is the probability and possibility of powerful change regime in Russia by that leaders?
I think at this point it's not high, but again, I think a lot depends on the battlefield, and which of course is yet another reason why that the U.S. and the Western and the allies have to keep providing advanced weapons to the Ukrainians. I have not seen any assessments discussed that show Putin's hold on power is slipping. But it is always notable to see when these kind of public breaks occur, and if you follow kind of the Russian media and certainly these Russian Telegram channels, you see this occurring not with more frequency, but every once in a while, and it's quite notable.
You mentioned situation on the ground. The Washington Post reported that Russia had lost its most capable special forces in the war in Ukraine. Could Russia still conduct serious secret operations?
Look, so this is something that, again, I think a lot of us who do follow the social media accounts quite closely, we're not surprised about, because we've seen the Spetsnaz units. This is the Russian commando units. Really take some serious casualties. The Washington Post report kind of put it all together. But I think you bring up a really good point: is what is Russia capable of now? And I don't think many military analysts that I read and follow, believe they are capable of, for example, any kind of concerted offensive operations. I think what Russia wants to do is dig in and hope for a stalemate, because again, they want to wait out this notion of Western resolve. But I think the commando units, the Spetsnaz units, taking such a beating is quite significant, because look, the U.S. military, Department of Defense officials have said quite openly they see no prospect of Russia retaking large swaths of Ukrainian territory. Again, that's because of the damage that's been done to the Russian military, and particularly to some of these commando units.
Thank you. And I would like to cover other types of secret operation espionage activity. Dozens of Russian diplomats have been expelled from the European countries due to their espionage activity. Could Russia still conduct espionage activity in Europe?
Well, so first, it has always been my contention that Russia saw Europe as its playground to conduct intelligence. Now, what's happened since February 24th of last year is that there's been a rather remarkable effort, either bilateral between countries or multilateral, or a combination of the two, where over 450 Russian intelligence officers have been expelled. And that is quite significant, because that does do damage to their ability to conduct intelligence operations. Now, what the Russians also use is illegals. And the term illegal means that someone who is not affiliated with the Russian embassy. And so, that has been a bit more difficult. You have seen, of course, some illegals wrapped up as well, most recently in Greece, for example. So the Russians still have an ability to run their operations, but I think it's been severely degraded, and it's about time, I'll tell you, because when I was in the U.S. government, we really saw the Russians do kind of what they wanted throughout the European continent. And ever since the invasion, that feeling has changed. And I think that's a good thing. The Russian intelligence service is not 10 feet tall, same as the Russian military. I think a lot of us, very often exaggerate their capabilities. They still are, they still can run espionage operations, but I think they have been pretty severely degraded. So we have to keep our guard up. But I think that there's a recognition amongst all the NATO countries that Russia the Russian intelligence finally had to be dealt a blow inside, and I think that kind of vigilance and that kind of cooperative effort will continue.
And my last question for you will be regarding the Five Eyes intelligence alliance, which consists of the US, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand. Would it be beneficial for the US to invite Ukraine to join Five Eyes intelligence alliance, maybe in the future, because Ukraine could share some important information on Russia?
Well, the Five Eyes intelligence partnership is decades long, and there's different aspects of this. The relationship that many of these countries have with the Ukrainians on a bilateral basis is something that is quite extraordinary. So I don't think there's any need for Ukraine to join. And there's a lot of provisions in this which have to do not only with the exchange of information, but of course how our allies store and handle it. For example, there's a very big debate in Japan on whether Japan should join the Five Eyes, but there's been some opposition to this because the Japanese laws are such where I think that the Five Eyes members don't believe that they can safeguard the information as well. So I have not seen any discussion of Ukraine joining the Five Eyes alliance. I don't think it's necessary, because I think the relationship that particularly the United States have with the Ukrainian intelligence services is as close as any in the world. And so this of course is something that didn't happen last February 24th. The United States and Ukraine have had a very tight relationship since even back to 2014, and there's strong bonds of trust between American intelligence and Ukrainian intelligence, and I think that's what matters. I will say that, just on a personal level, I have not seen this type of, feeling of drive and desire since after the attacks on September 12th. This is amongst my old colleagues. We always, this, and so the war in Ukraine, at least from my perspective and talking to my former colleagues, is kind of is something. It's a classic David versus Goliath story, but this is the great war of our time in the sense of we have to help the Ukrainians prevail. The kind of the brotherhood and sisterhood we feel with our Ukrainian partners is something that I have never seen again since the days after September 12th, when we certainly had a lot of allies helping us in the fight against Al Qaeda. So I think, again, a long answer to your question is I don't think the Ukraine needs to join the Five Eyes, because I think the intelligence partnerships are pretty extraordinary and will continue to be so.
Thank you for your support of Ukraine and support of your government, and also thank you for your time and participation in our interview, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much.